and welcome to Guidance Review. I'm David Pudwill, and today we're going to be talking about a June 2020 FDA guidance document on discontinuation and interruptions in critical medical devices and supplies during the COVID-19 public health emergency. So the guidance document we'll be going through today, here we have it up, and if you see here, we can scroll down and we can download the final guidance document. We'll get into that momentarily. And we can also go check out this docket number. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, this docket number covers a wide number of guidance documents. And so if we pull up this docket, we'll see there are 84 comments, but this is broadly for all of these COVID guidances. And if we pull up the specific set of comments and do a search for discontinuance, which is a keyword in this particular guidance document, then we'll see that there are two relevant comments. We can pull up either one of these comments, and here we see one from the Medical Imaging and Technology Alliance. And this goes into some detail about this particular guidance document. So if we go back and we pull up the actual final guidance document here, this will pull up a PDF, and here we can see that this particular guidance document is revised multiple times, I believe, and this document supersedes notifying CDRH of a permanent discontinuance or interruption in manufacturing of a device under Section 506J of the FD&C Act during the COVID-19 public health emergency that was issued May 2020. And here again, we see the public comment statement that the guidance is being issued to address the public health emergency. This guidance is being implemented without prior public comment because the Food and Drug Administration or FDA or agency has determined that prior public participation is not feasible or appropriate. And comments can be submitted to the docket that we just checked out. And here you can request additional copies or direct any questions to CDRH manufacturer shortage at fda.hhs.gov. So here we have a table of contents. And if we get into the meat of the document, here we see some statements about FDA playing a critical role in protecting the U.S. from threats such as emerging infectious diseases. FDA is issuing this guidance to implement Section 506J of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as added by Sections 3121 of the CARES Act as it relates to device shortages and potential device shortages occurring during the pandemic. And here we see that Section 506J requires manufacturers to notify FDA of a permanent discontinuance in the manufacture of certain devices or an interruption in the manufacture of certain devices that is likely to lead to a meaningful disruption in supply. And here, FDA is recommending that manufacturers voluntarily provide additional details to better ensure FDA has the specific information it needs to help prevent or mitigate shortages during the emergency. And this policy is intended to remain in effect only for the duration of the public health emergency. And here we see again that it's being implemented without prior public comment, this particular guidance document. And in general, here's another statement about FDA guidance documents and use of the word should and what they establish, etc. Here in the background, again, we see some further detail about COVID-19 and the CARES Act and some of the language around permanent discontinuance in the manufacture of the device. And we also get into some detail here about the availability on FDA's website of a list of device types that FDA recommends manufacturers consider in determining whether notification under this section is appropriate. And so we can see here, if we open that up, here are the specific device types that FDA wants you to be considering. They cover a fairly broad range of products, but this is the comprehensive list of products FDA believes that falls under this particular policy. So then we get into the specific questions that I want you to be able to answer as we wrap up this video. So one, who must notify CDRH of a permanent discontinuance or interruption? When and how to notify FDA? And what information to include in notifications. So here we see the start of who must notify a CDRH. Under Section 506J, manufacturers of the following devices must notify FDA of an interruption or permanent discontinuance. Devices that are critical to public health during the public health emergency, including those that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for use in emergency medical care or during surgery, or devices for which FDA determines information on potential meaningful supply disruptions is needed during a public health emergency. For purposes of this guidance, FDA interprets the term manufacturer to mean the entity that holds the medical device marketing submission authorization, or if a medical device marketing submission is not required, the entity responsible for listing the medical device under Section 510J of the FD&C Act. If a manufacturer makes a device described that has marketing authorization from FDA or is listed, that device is subject to a notification to FDA pursuant to Section 506J. For example, manufacturers of ventilators or thermometers that have received 510K clearance or of surgical gowns listed pursuant to Section 510J are subject to the notification requirements in Section 506J. Manufacturers of devices such as ventilators or thermometers that are required to submit a pre-market notification and obtain FDA clearance prior to marketing the device in the United States, but have not received such clearance and are distributing the device in light of an FDA guidance on enforcement discretion, are not subject to the notification requirements. Manufacturers of devices that are critical to public health during a public health emergency or for which FDA determines information on potential meaningful supply disruptions is needed during a public health emergency are required to notify FDA of an interruption or permanent discontinuance in manufacturing of such devices. FDA recommends manufacturers evaluate the following circumstances when determining whether they are required to notify FDA. Whether the device, with or without accessories, is life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for use in emergency medical care. Examples could include ventilator and ventilator tubing, hemodialysis equipment, automated external defibrillator. Whether the device, with or without accessories, is intended for use during surgery, and whether the device, with or without accessories and/or testing supplies, is used to diagnose, cure, treat, mitigate, or prevent COVID-19. And also whether the device, with or without accessories, would be in higher than typical demand during the response to the pandemic, compared to a similar period of time outside of the pandemic. So PPE is the example they use here. And again, they refer you to FDA's website for a list of device types and corresponding product codes that FDA recommends manufacturers consider in determining whether they are required to notify FDA during the pandemic. This list represents FDA's current understanding of the circumstances described above. This list is not exhaustive, they say, and FDA intends to update this list as the pandemic evolves. So while it does cover FDA's current comprehensive understanding, I would say it's not exhaustive because they may become aware of other items in the future. If you're aware that your device should be on the list, then contact FDA. So if you believe you should be subject to this guidance, but FDA hasn't identified your specific device type, FDA wants you to notify them. And if a manufacturer is not certain whether to notify FDA, FDA recommends that the manufacturer contact the agency at the mailbox listed below. And then in terms of when to notify FDA. So manufacturers must notify FDA at least 6 months in advance of a permanent discontinuance or interruption, or as soon as practicable. For purposes of this guidance, FDA considers as soon as practicable to mean that a manufacturer should notify FDA no later than 7 calendar days after the discontinuance or interruption in manufacturing occurs. With sufficient notice, FDA can work with the manufacturers and other stakeholders to potentially prevent and mitigate shortages, helping prevent negative impacts to patients and healthcare personnel. The term meaningful disruption is defined as a change in production that is reasonably likely to lead to a reduction in the supply of a device by a manufacturer that is more than negligible and affects the ability of the manufacturer to fill orders or meet expected demands for its product. And here, FDA interprets this to mean that a manufacturer should base its reporting on its own capacity, supply, and orders, and should not consider other manufacturers' or competitors' capacities or assumed capacities or what it understands about market demand for the device. And here FDA provides the term meaningful disruption does not include the following types of interruptions. The COVID pandemic triggered unprecedented increased demand for some medical devices, as well as significant disruptions in global medical device manufacturing and supply chain operations. And for the purposes of this guidance, FDA interprets interruptions in manufacturing to include those that occur as a result of a decrease in manufacturing capability or increased demand. After the initial notification, FDA recommends manufacturers provide updates every 2 weeks. And if a manufacturer is considering taking an action that may lead to a meaningful disruption in the supply of the device, holding production to investigate a quality issue or transfer ownership, FDA requests that the manufacturer notify FDA immediately through the process explained here. In addition, FDA requests that the manufacturer notify FDA if there are other government entities that are ordering actions that divert supply. So here we see what information to include in notifications. The specific details of how to communicate to FDA are a little further below. There's an email address that they provide. And what to include is here. Per 506J, manufacturers of the devices identified in Section 3A of this guidance must notify FDA of a permanent discontinuance in the manufacturer of the device, an interruption of the manufacturer, and the reasons for such discontinuance or interruption. When providing a notification pursuant to 506J, the manufacturer should also provide FDA with appropriate identifying information such as marketing submission holder name, submission number, etc. And that's all below. In addition, FDA recommends manufacturers submit other information as outlined below, and there's an example, as I said, here below. So again, here FDA calls out that you don't need to have all the information before submitting a notification. Notifications can be updated at any time to include additional information, and therefore FDA recommends that you don't delay notifying the agency until everything's available, but make the initial notification as soon as practicable and provide additional information as it becomes available. Any information provided to FDA that is trade secret or confidential information will be treated as such, consistent with 552B, subsection 4 of Title 5, United States Code 1905, and other applicable laws. So this has been a concern for some medical device companies. And FDA's made that explicit here, that this information will remain trade secret. And again, here's how to notify FDA. Here's the email specifically. And a single initial notification may include a list of all affected devices and must include the information required in 506J. If an additional device is newly affected, FDA recommends submitting a new notification as opposed to an update to a previous notification. And here's an example notification with the detail that FDA would like to see. And it's fairly comprehensive. And again, as FDA said, if you don't have all of this information available, share what you do as an initial submission and then update it as you move forward. Hopefully you found that helpful discussion and detail on this particular guidance document. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you've learned who must notify CDRH. We went through that in some detail, when and how to notify FDA. There's an email box, and as soon as practicable, but ideally 6 months before discontinuation or interruption. And I think FDA realizes that in many cases that's not practicable. So at least within 7 days following that is what FDA's expectations are, and what information to include in notifications. And FDA has provided a lot of example detail here for you. So hopefully you've found this all very informative, and I hope that you have an excellent day. Thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.